start with, I thought from Ocean Culture's point of view, I'd just like to say thank you for everyone joining. We have been celebrating World Oceans Day for some time now, and we like to share it by simply sharing some of the stories and the crucial work that our community, our ocean guardians and storytellers are doing around the world. It's something we look forward to every year, and we often find a lot of the conversations are then turned into actionable steps. And also, more importantly, connections, because it's all about collaborating, right? Collaborating and connecting with each other, right? So whilst our physical celebrations this year were cancelled, and Danny, I know you had quite a few that were cancelled as well, there's always a silver lining. We would never have let this day gone unnoticed. So it's why we've hosted this day full of talks. It's been great so far. Today we're going to speak a little bit about how we can best work to inspire and educate about ocean conservation whilst working to inspire the next generation. We're also going to discuss ways in which we can work to raise awareness and inspire positive change. And to help us do that, we've got a fantastic panel of dedicated ocean advocates and storytellers that I will pass over and let introduce themselves. Guys, please do use the comment box and the Q&A box as well, because we'd love to just answer those as we go through. So to start with, I think it'd be nice to pass over to Danny first, because that's where you are on my screen, and then we'll kind of move across and we'll just start by introducing ourselves and who we are, what we do, and how we got to where we are.
Fantastic. Thank you so much, Tamsin. It's a pleasure to be here with you all today. It's my favorite day of the year, even more than the holidays. I love World Oceans Day with all my heart. I'm originally from Miami, Florida, and my family heritage is from Jamaica and the Caribbean. And I grew up very close to the ocean. In Florida, I mean, it's easy to fall in love because we have beautiful, warm water. And that's what I did growing up. My parents were wonderful in taking me to the beach all the time from when I was an infant all the way throughout my childhood and teenage years. And from early on, that curiosity and fascination with the ocean was blossoming. And my parents noticed, although they didn't quite understand it because I had no one else in my family or friend group that really loved the ocean like I did. They did everything in their power to give me the tools and resources to learn more. All the books, they sent me to summer camps. They sent me, I went to a high school that had a phenomenal marine science magnet program in Hollywood, Florida. And that opened my world so much. And I understood that there was a space for me, that I could be something, an advocate for the ocean, a marine scientist. All those things were running through my mind. So studying marine science at the University of Miami was tremendous. I achieved this basic foundational knowledge about the ocean. But at the end of my undergrad, I realized very quickly that my job and my purpose was, it wasn't necessarily meant to be a researcher, although I thought it was. I love research. I love field work and all of that. I mean, it makes me happy. But I knew that there was something missing. We needed the communications to happen about our oceans that were in peril, that are still in peril. And I felt as though my community, even locally in South Florida, had no idea what was happening in their blue backyard. And I met children all the time who lived 5-10 miles away from the beach and had never been for various reasons. And so after college, I founded a nonprofit called Big Blue and You, which is an organization focused on inspiring and educating young people about the ocean through art and science. So we bring together artists and scientists from our community, and we celebrate the ocean in a festival format. And our festival is called Art by the Sea. And it's just a fun day to say thank you to the ocean for all that it gives us, and to also learn and to spark that curiosity. And it's been a blast. I started this nonprofit in 2008. So I was 21 years old when that happened. And with the help and collaboration with my mom, who has wonderful business acumen, we were able to develop this nonprofit. We are nimble, and we are constantly getting involved in different projects, and it's been a wonderful platform. But in closing, one of the things that I do for a daily living, because many of us know that nonprofit work doesn't mean you're going to become a millionaire, that is for sure. It's a labor of love. But my day job is being a science communicator. I am someone who works in television, linear television, and digital media to communicate science concepts. And I've always loved the idea of communicating with K through 12 audience. So I started with textbooks back in 2008. I worked with a team of science filmmakers to create videos as supplementary material for school books. And then from there, launched into a career on TV with my first show on Fox. here in the US called Nature Knows Best, which focused on biomimicry and all of the ways that nature is inspiring new technology and design. And most recently, I'm the correspondent on Mission Unstoppable, which is a show featuring women in STEM, science, technology, engineering, and math. And I absolutely love my job. So it's really, truly an honor to be here. And thank you for the invitation.
Oh, no, thank you, Danny. And I can't wait to ask you a few questions about biomimicry, because I know that's something that blew my mind when I was learning about that. And it's something that I think we can all still learn from, especially moving out of COVID. So, Joya, what about yourself? Maybe introduce yourself, a little bit about you.
Yeah, so Luce and I work in a directing duo called The Right to Roam, and I grew up in Dorset in the southwest of the UK, and have had like an insanely privileged childhood, just having access to the ocean for years. And Luce taught me to surf, forced me to surf over the years, and that's kind of been a real therapy through the years. And I think it's just been this constant kind of building relationship with the ocean, and not taking for granted what it gives me personally, and from that place seeing what it gives the rest of the world and ocean communities and surf communities. So we've been lucky enough to travel the world and be commissioned to make lots of incredible films which highlight role models standing up to protect their communities or engaging their communities. And yeah, that's our job, which is quite weird. So we're filmmakers, and we're kind of finding our feet in the world of filmmaking and environmentalism. I wouldn't say we're not activists, and we don't call ourselves activists. We kind of like to be a bit like anonymous, and put the people who the films are about to the forefront. And yeah, just navigating being kind of intersectional environmental filmmakers. Yeah.
That's great. And actually, like, Luce, have you got anything to add there?
Yeah, thanks, Job. I guess I actually feel like my journey, even before I started as a filmmaker, I like began wanting to be an ocean conservationist. That was like the first thing that I ever wanted to do. And I was really lucky to grow up in Midwest Wales. And we have the whole of the coastline there, which is called Cardigan Bay, is like a special area of conservation. And there's some amazing voluntary organizations that try and protect it. And I think that my experiences there like had such a big effect on me. And I always talk about it, like, it seems like a small thing now, having seen like so much different amazing marine wildlife, but the first time I saw dolphins like actually changed my life. I was like I was just about to swear, but I was like, this needs to be protected. Like, it's almost like everything became quite clear to me, like how special it was, but also the fragility in it. And that was like something that I went through in my like teen years, and then I kind of wanted to become a filmmaker and lived in cities, and I guess I learned a skill. And when I met Joya, it was like I think both having this kind of same values, and then realizing that we can put that into filmmaking, which is like appreciating nature, and then also using film as a way to discuss our relationship with it, and hopefully inspire others to think about their own relationship with it. It's like it all came together. So then since then it's been like a natural progression of like that really big part of my life, which is like the ocean, and something that I try and get into the ocean every day. And that connecting with filmmaking is like, yeah, it's just an ever-growing relationship. And then I guess like it's been in the last couple of years where we've really become, like Joya says, we're not activists, but I think we want to become activists. We're finding the natural path to be activists in a way which feels right, which isn't like we don't feel that our personal voices are necessarily that powerful on their own, because we have come from quite a privileged position. But it's how can we look at our own privilege and then also meet and collaborate with amazing communities around the world to try and inspire people to look after the ocean, and also tackle the inequality that there is for people to access the ocean too. And I think that's where we're at now, and where we will move forward on with filmmaking, is like trying to speak about those things and have an impact in those areas.
No, that's amazing. Thank you, Lucy. And Iona.
Hi everyone. My name's Iona. I'm the CMO at Ocean Bottle. This is one half of our bottles. Ocean Bottle is fighting the war on plastic, but I suppose before that, I've always been a city rat. I've always loved the ocean holidays, and the beach holidays were my favourite thing, and I pined after going to the sea. But I have always lived in cities. I used to work in marketing for some behemoths. I'm really interested in how culture moves and what influences, and the scary but exciting role that brands and businesses can play in people's lives. About 4 or 5 years ago, I increasingly became more and more aware of the climate crisis, and I knew that I had to work in it. And the more aware I became of the oceans and how intrinsic they are to our existence, the harder it became to ignore. And I used to trawl the internet just looking for brands or for businesses that I believed genuinely wanted to have a positive role within this world and to put kind of purpose over profit. And so I joined Ocean Bottle, and we're just over a year in. And I don't have a day where I don't regret the move. And nothing excites me more than working with people like Tamsin and Danny and Joya and Lucy. And so I'm excited to be speaking on this day, and looking forward to all the amazing change that is going to happen, because I just read the stats on how many people are tuning into these conversations. And, you know, because of COVID-19 and the fact that all these events are happening online, the world's never been as engaged with ocean conservation as ever. So it's a really exciting time. And I'm delighted to be here with you all.
And to Iona's point, we're also saving such a massive carbon footprint by doing this.
Exactly.
It's like
Huge win.
That's so true. I mean, we had an event planned over here, but we had a plan for Joe Royale, who's the founder of Common Seas, who has a boat made out of ocean plastic, to sail over all of our participants from the UK. But then being able to have people like yourself, Danny, on board, and to be able to have these conversations we really have had everyone from all over the world today. It's been really powerful, and something that has definitely made me realise the power of connection online and having people listening from all over the world. It's great. Lucy and Joya, you touched on, and I know we can all sympathise with, not everyone has the opportunity to enjoy our oceans, and subsequently can at times not always connect or feel the emotion towards certain creative. And I know, Danny, you do a lot of work with art and science to bring this to communities that might not necessarily have the opportunity. So, and I know one of your documentaries points on this, Lucy and Joya. So how might we generate a little bit more interest and curiosity in young people who might not have the opportunity to access the ocean?
I think there's so many different ways to do that, isn't there? Lucy, you speak. Sorry.
No, yeah, exactly. We actually spoke about this a bit earlier, and I think there are many different ways to do that, and that's why it's so amazing to even be on a panel with 4 women who are all inspiring people in so many different ways. And that's just one panel and one event, and it's like there are so many amazing, inspiring people all around the world doing it in different ways, and it completely depends on your position. I suppose from our point of view, storytelling is our tool, and there's so much power in storytelling, because you can take a story from Colombia and you can allow people all over the world to feel the emotion of that story, and they can feel the emotion and take a dive under the ocean and see like fish, see marine life from the comfort of their own homes. And I think that's, you know, there's a lot to be said about media and everything, but at least we are able, through storytelling and through filmmaking and through imagery, to kind of allow people to visualize these worlds in a way that they've never have been able to before. And I think that's really one important way. And I think the other kind of knock-on effect from storytelling is that when you use them to make an impact. So I really believe that storytelling is powerful, but there is nothing quite like someone going and seeing the ocean physically in person, or like dipping their toes in the ocean, or even going for a swim. And I think that with filmmaking, when you use it as an impact tool, you can raise awareness of the need for more funding to be put into charities, and even maybe for more charities themselves to be founded that allow people to have access from the ocean. So like charities that are based in London that take kids on holidays to Cornwall or Wales, and so I think there's that crossover between, like, storytelling is so powerful and such an amazing way of communicating, but how can we then use those stories to show that we need to bring more funding and support and actually take kids, people, everyone who doesn't have equal access to the ocean to be able to access it physically too.
Yeah, absolutely, Lucy. Completely agree. Danny, do you want to talk a little bit about how you kind of do that with the Big Blue and You, and kind of you've got some plans for later on in the day as well, but how do you kind of I suppose connect young people and that wouldn't always have the opportunity or even awareness around the ocean?
Well, yeah, I mean, as a Black woman myself, I grew up without seeing images of other Black women and women of color in ocean conservation, marine science. And so I had to dig deep as a young person to be like, okay, am I really going to try and do this? Is this really meant for me? But I felt every time that I, like Lucy said, dipped my toe in the ocean, when I immersed myself in the water, I was reaffirmed within myself, like, yes, this is my calling. And so from then on, that's been my mission. And so through Big Blue and You, we've effectively attempted to open that door, and where we raise funds to hire buses, school buses, to go pick up children from communities that aren't able to get to the beach, and we bring them and their families out to the beach to our event for free, and we get to celebrate with them. And it's just like the whole world opens up when you look out on the expanse of the horizon when you're on the beach. It's like it reminds you of how small we really are, and that this world is so much bigger, and how we are all interconnected. And last week I shared a story and a little bit of history on my Instagram, because I wanted to make sure that people knew about the history, specifically coming from the United States of America, and people of color in this country, and our relationship to water is very unique in that our ancestors had to deal with the pain and trauma of transiting across the Atlantic in one of the most horrific ways possible. And that trauma has still been passed down generation to generation. And because of segregation and racial inequality in this country, my grandparents even didn't have access to public pools to learn how to swim, a basic skill set that everyone should have. This was prevented. And so as we've seen, we're looking at this generation now and wondering, why is it that Black children in America don't know how to swim? You got to look at the history. And what I'm proud of, and what I posted in that Instagram caption, was back on May 9th, 1945, 7 teenagers waded into the water on Miami Beach, on Hollower Beach, where it was solely whites only. And they made a statement peacefully that they wanted access to this water so that we could all enjoy the beauty that we have in Miami. And from there, 10 years later, then the American Civil Rights Movement was launched in 1955 based on that spark that they set off, these 7 young people. And what's ironic and what was an epiphany for me was May 9th. That day is a particularly special day because my parents had a daughter who was born before I was. Unfortunately, she passed away when she was a month old because of sudden infant death syndrome. And her name was Tommy Kay. And May 9th is her birthday. She was born in 1984, 2 years before me. And what that solidified for me, again, it's like these cosmic messages that we have to be open to and listen to. It's like, yes, this is my lane. My sister even told me this is where you're supposed to be, because 39 years, I mean, it's amazing. And I just encourage more people to create these visual stories so people can see themselves in this narrative. That's really important. And I just want to show this too. I was just sent this book by a dear friend in Colorado who wrote it. It's called What's the Commotion in the Ocean? And it's a brand new book, and it shows a brown mermaid, which is a storybook that I wished I had when I was a young girl. This is how I saw myself. And so the more that we inspire and we invest in people like this author who is creating the stories and creating the narrative, the more that message will be amplified. So if there's anything that you can do to help support that, do it.
I was literally, Danny, I was going to say this, like I wanted to talk about this, is that imagine all of look at the innovation that's happened in the past 10 years and Sylvia Earle and all these amazing kind of like ocean ancestors have been talking about this all day, but only in the past like decade have people started to really kind of take action and there's been change. If we were to open up a more kind of level playing field and we were to treat climate justice as racial justice, imagine all the books that could be written, the startups, the ecosystems, the coral reefs conserved, the art created. It's like it should be a primary agenda, because ocean conservation's been opened up in so many ways just in a decade, and it needs to be kind of opened up even more, and we'll start to see even more books like that, and we'll start to have even more kids from Clapton in London wanting to go and work in ocean conservation. So thank you for sharing that. We should definitely share around like a link of resources after this, Tammy.
Absolutely, that's a really great idea, Iona, 100%. And Danny, you put the link in. I was about to say someone's asked where they can get the book. I'm going to buy it for my little niece as well, my goddaughter. That's beautiful. I can't wait to get my hands on that. And I think that naturally brings us on nicely to talking a little bit more about cross-cultural conversation. I think it's really important that we all talk about this today. Do we feel there's enough of this in the marine environmental advocacy sector? I mean, I think we all know the answer to this. And Danny, maybe you can elaborate on this a little bit more, and how we really kind of inspire and motivate these marginalized voices to step up and step in, and how can we go about doing that?
Well, I think diversity, there's a really good quote that is diversity is being invited to the party, and inclusion is actually being asked to dance. And so in these spaces, we need more activists and people who are allies who recognize the disparity, that we don't have enough diversity in this room right now. So what am I going to do personally? What am I going to do to invite someone, at least one person, to that ocean conference, to that summit, to that gathering, to the beach, to go surfing? Like, how are you actively doing that? And in light of all of the events that have happened in the last 14 days, and how we've seen the world come together to speak up about the inhumane murder of George Floyd and Breonna Taylor and Ahmaud Arbery and all of the other Black people in this country who have been taken away from us for no reason, we're speaking up and showing that we are one human family, and there's no more room for racism. You have to be actively anti-racist. That is the new culture and the lifestyle that we have to pursue as a human race, because that's, there's just no more room for it. So I think the ocean is the ultimate healer. We all know that if we have a gash or a wound and you go into the water, that wound will be healed in a much faster pace than if you hadn't. And so right now, what we're looking at, what we're in the midst of, is this massive bandage that's been ripped off a wound that's been festering for far too long. And now we have the opportunity, specifically in the ocean community, to be that healer, to be that salve that's going to heal this wound. And I just believe it with my heart and soul that if we get more people in the ocean, we will solve so many human problems. Like it sounds simple and rudimentary, but I really do believe that, because that is our source. That is where we came from. That is where we're going to go back to.
Absolutely. It's a medicine of all sorts, isn't it? I think for so many different reasons. And I think that's really inspirational to hear. But also I think as we kind of move forward, especially out of COVID, and and how businesses are approaching this. One nice thing that Will from Oceanographic said, he said that his pledge for World Oceans Day this year is to look at his cross-cultural conversation and to make sure that he's speaking openly about this, and that's his pledge this year, which I thought was really nice, and I think it's important and something that we all need to consider moving forward. So it is a time for everyone to be part of this conversation, because it's every voice, let's face it, every background, every walk of life, and every background should be represented when it comes to protecting nature. That's a given. So what can we be doing better as a global community to ensure a more integrated approach? Anyone can I just thought this was more of like there's a few things that we can be doing, but maybe talking to maybe this is where our panel, some audience members can jump in as well and share some of their ideas.
I have lots to say about this, but I want to make sure that everyone gets the opportunity to speak.
Yeah, I can talk about it like how I see it from a company and like business point of view, I suppose. I think as Danny's mentioned, diversity and talent and where and how you're hiring people is really, really important. I think that if you're a business operating in different markets, you have to think about how you're working within the community, and whether you're kind of just coming in and jumping out, and how you're setting up the right kind of community-based infrastructure so that communities can almost become kind of resilient and self-reliant in their own in their own kind of respect, without having to rely on a corporate entity or a big kind of white savior coming in. I think from a communications level, you absolutely have to be kind of putting at the forefront diverse influencers, storytellers, connectors. You need to make a point of working with people from backgrounds different to your own, and providing them with a platform to talk, rather than me informing how they should talk. I think that from a product level as well, you need to be thinking about how you're going to make your product accessible. I mean, it's tricky because our product has a high price point. It's £40. That's definitely not a budget that would accommodate for lots of people living in lots of places. So we have to think about how we can get people the access to that product. I think sustainability naturally is reserved for the few, and it shouldn't be like that. I think we need to be thinking about our marketing spend as well, and rather than necessarily spending on advertising that talks about us, thinking about how we spend on behaviours, and thinking about whether we could instead pay for a group of kids to go on a trip to the sea, or whether we could pay to have swimming lessons within a school, or whether we could instead set up a program where a certain amount of students are given a certain amount of bottles every year. I think you have to think about your behaviour more than your kind of communication, I suppose. And then I think you continue to work with people like these three who are kind of better storytellers, really. And I think be consistent in your message, because the world of kind of ocean conservation and climate justice, it can be quite complex, and I think it's probably a good idea to stick at a few things and tell them really well, rather than trying to do too many things.
I think the ocean community has to do a better job of also talking about the reason why we're fighting for the ocean and the health of the ocean. Yes, we're all, dependent on it, but it's an existential thing to talk about. And then when we saw the movement of moving away from single-use plastics, and we recognized the video that was shot by Dr. Christine Figuener in Costa Rica of that sea turtle with a straw lodged in its nose, we saw that the remnants or the after effects of these choices and behaviors, like Iona said. But what's deeper than that is understanding the full story behind things like plastics. We need to see on every level, from start to finish, where this material, although it's been the catalyst for bringing us into this amazing digital age, it's also been the death of us, literally, because we have pulled up old, dead organic material, old dead animals from millions of years ago from out of the Earth's crust and lifted it to the surface when we did not need it. We have every energy source that we need here that's clean already. And now we've transitioned it into this stuff that we keep pushing as consumers. And like, it's just this cyclical thing that we have to break. And right now, because of COVID, this is one of the reasons why I think I'm just thankful that COVID happened, is because we know now we're able to face ourselves. We can look in the mirror and say, whoa, what have we been doing? We've been on this treadmill looking at this goal in the distant future, thinking we're going to get there, but we never will, because we're on this path where it's just cycling back and forth. So COVID has forced us to get off of that treadmill, unplug it, stop sucking the power, and walk to that goal and get there together. And that's where I think we can step up, and to make sure that we look at every aspect of how climate justice is intrinsically connected to ocean conservation. They're one and the same.
Yeah. And on Danny's point, I think talking about sort of telling the story behind things, that's why I love what you guys, Tamsin, is you have such a focus on an individual's journey into ocean conservation and into caring about the ocean. I think that's really helpful, because if many individual stories are told, someone is always going to find something that they can relate to in that. So, you know, for example, with our storytelling, we could tell a film about an amazing woman, Imani Wilmot, in Jamaica, who is using surfing as a tool as her community. Yeah, and it's like that. Her story, just one positive role model, can inspire so many people around the world, because there's so many different ways that they can relate to her story and the women around her. Or, for example, a film we've made in Colombia about another islander who, Yasandra, a young woman who doesn't come from a background, a really well-educated background, but her raw love for the ocean has turned into something that looks very much like, you know, an amazing environmental leader. And there's people will be able to relate to her story because she hasn't come from a background of education or anything, but she's shone through in her community. And so it's telling as many different individual stories as we can, with depth and emotion, and it allows, you know, endless audiences to relate to that and want to understand the ocean themselves and want to conserve it, to protect it. So I love looking at, like you said, the story behind things in different ways. It's like the story behind plastic, the story behind how we got here with how we're destroying it, but also individual stories on what brings people to protect it. And that will make up one big story, which hopefully from now will continue to be like an amazing collected effort to protect the ocean.
I want to say something about storytelling specifically, unless people are bored about talking about storytelling, and I'll stop, just tell me. But the way that we choose to tell these stories and the like frameworks in which we work in, Lucy and I have found that we've always kind of, through budget or scheduling or commissioner demands or whatever it is, that you're like pushed to work within these specific frameworks that don't really like empower you to settle into the place with the people and like have this like whole holistic approach to filmmaking. And we're trying to really push away from that, and like sometimes it can be quite exhausting because you feel like you're literally like pushing against a river that is flowing at you and it's just disagreeing with you and you're just standing up against it. And it's these kind of frameworks that lots of industries have, but specifically the film industry, which is, you know, just to get a story on screen. And actually it's got nothing really to do with like the film that is eventually seen on the screen. There's so much to be said for the way that story has been conducted behind screen, and like the relationship with the community and how people's voices are empowered, and if their voice is the voice that shone through and the story was told in the way that was right to them and their community's voice was heard, and impact and the money that might be raised from the film will go back into supporting them or supporting the protection of their reef. And it's not done enough, that kind of stuff. And it's kind of a more like, a holistic way of storytelling where the before and after and during is all taken more into account. And Danny, you probably have a lot to say about that from hosting television shows and like your experiences maybe of like working with communities. Do you think there's challenges and ways that we can tell stories better in the ocean conservation sphere?
Absolutely. I mean, from my own personal perspective, on the history books on paper, I'm the first African American Black woman to host a science show in the U.S. and that was in 2016. I think that speaks volumes to where we are with this type of media, and I just admire you, Joya and Lucy, for challenging the status quo. That is something that I think Gen Z has done a tremendous job. You guys are the most informed generation of all human history at this point. You got the world at your fingertips, and you can create these stories and not have to follow the path that was set for the last however many years within the traditional media zone. And I decided to go into linear television because I knew that's where I could reach the people that are not a part of the choir. I think I don't watch TV myself. Like I don't watch TV, but I'm on TV because I know I'm going to speak to somebody different. And I think the ocean community needs to be conscious about how we create and who we share these stories with. And that's the creative part of it all, which I love. The artists are always the tip of the spear when it comes to any type of change that we want to impact. And so if artists can find creative ways to share these stories in different mediums, that's where I think the magic is.
And also, it's brands like Ocean Bottle and other businesses that are realizing the need to have like a social and environmental responsibility, because it's like people who actually have the money, and it's the people behind the productions, and like that's why it's really important that there are brands that are recognizing the need to put money into projects that do care, and the care comes from the very root, which is from the filmmaker's personal care and the brand's personal care. And hopefully there's going to be an increasing amount of film commissioners and TV commissioners that do care as well. But we're the ones that are here to set the bar, because we need to be the ones that are begging and demanding.
Begging, demanding.
Yes.
We won't beg, but we will demand.
Yes.
The space, the time, and the money to make things, to tell stories, to amplify voices in a fair, equal, and nurturing way. So thank you, Iona.
Yes.
That brings me on, Iona, to let's talk a little bit more about purpose-driven brands and working with nature and not against it, because it's so important and something that you guys have done a fantastic job doing, and so many people can learn from Ocean Bottles. So please let's talk about that a little bit more, especially because you've got first-hand experience of working with brands previously as well. So
yeah, well, thank you for your comments. I mean there's loads of companies to who are doing far bigger, greater things than us. We're just getting going, but hopefully we can be up there with the greats in a few years' time. I think that, well, I kind of talked about it before. I think that you've got to play a role within the lives of society and your customers above and beyond selling product. And so you definitely have to have a purpose and a mission, which we do. We're focused on clearing as much plastic from going into the oceans as possible. We believe that waste management is like the solution to saving our oceans at the moment. There's obviously lots of solutions, but that's where we're focused. But I think communications are, you know, everything, and the more revenue that we start to make, the more money that we'll have to spend on communicating. And so it's imperative that we get it right from the get-go, and that we give the tools and the platform to makers like these guys. But also I think that, you know, advertising isn't always a solution. I think that I talked about this before, about behaviors and thinking about your role within the community, and how you can actually affect change that isn't typical kind of marketing and advertising. And I think, you know, I can probably learn from the likes of Nike in my time there. You know, of course they did spend big money on ads, and they put out political opinions. They just came out with something, you know, after what's been happening in the States, but they spend a lot of money on kind of activating communities locally, and putting in kind of football pitches, and giving kids like the materials and the training kit that they need. And I think it's about that. As to whether Nike's a good corporation or not now, I don't know, but it certainly commands a lot of power, and I think that's interesting. I think that in the ocean space, you know, we've talked about it a lot, in that so many people just aren't connected. So I think that's, you know, that's a critical pillar of what we do. We need to connect as many people who aren't in our echo chamber of oceans. And I think actually products and beautifully designed things are a really great way to do that, because people are always going to want to sort of buy things, and you know, they're always going to want to engage with brands, and spend. That's just how we operate. That's just like, you know, humans. And so I think if you can create a product that has an intrinsic kind of impact to it, and connect people to that, and give them the opportunity to continue to help with your mission and what you're doing, then that's really cool. And I think that, yeah, once you kind of get people to fall in love with the oceans, you can get them to do something, and that's when you develop a really close bond with your community. So we've got about 50,000 bottles out there in the world, but we've got an incredibly engaged community. It's mostly through email, to be honest, and it's just grown. We haven't spent a huge amount of time or money on social media, but we've been really growing this community through email, and involving people in our journey, and saying to them, you know, what are we not doing? What should we be doing more of? What does a better world look like? What should capitalism look like?
That's such a good point. Imagination. There's this incredible book by a writer called Amitav Ghosh called The Great Derangement, and it's all about his personal experience with climate justice. And we've got to imagine there's a better world, like, because there is, and there's a lot of people who have a lot of faith. I was with my dad earlier. He's such a pessimist. It's horrible to be around him. But the only way we're going to make this world a better place to be on is just to imagine that there's a better way. And that's like across like gender injustice, racial injustice, environmental injustice. They all come together. And yeah, me and Lucy have been trying to, especially in the film we just made in Colombia, it's like a climate justice narrative. So how can we use a magical, realist, kind of surreal approach to storytelling, which pushes this film so that it will remain in this like hopeful place in the future with this like futuristic context? And it's not typical journalism, and when you watch it, you're just like, hope. This film is in a place in the future, and there's so many different ways of telling stories that feel futuristic and feel hopeful, like Afrofuturism. So that was a tangent, but imagination.
Absolutely.
I love that, Joya. I was going to say that I think it takes it even a step beyond just hope. It's about reimagining, like you said, and envisioning what future we want. as we move through this time where there's so much despair and sadness and horrible things going on in the world right now, we have the power to change it. That is the magic of being a human being. We have this wonderful organ in our skull that is able to create whatever we want. And I think being more specific collectively, saying this is what we need, and taking notes from nature and looking at nature, everything in nature is circular. So why isn't our economy, why isn't our world operating in that same circular way? We have been moving on this linear path that leads to a dead end. Now we need to get back to where it all started. And I think that's going to inform storytelling, that's going to inform commerce and how we give back to one another. And that when we buy things, it's an exchange of energy. Money just happens to be the tool, but we need to exchange this and make sure that everyone is covered on every part of that circle.
Yeah, that's a beautiful way of thinking of it, Dan. I hadn't thought of it like that, like an exchange of energy and being able to put your money where your mouth is, so to speak. And I think one thing that I wanted to touch on off the back of imagination is innovation. And it's something that you talk about a lot, Danny, in biomimicry. And I think for, young scientists and people that, moving forward and want to potentially become an entrepreneur. And I think biomimicry is a fantastic example of how, we can work in harmony with nature and make profit worth having, etc. And I think that's something that you've touched on a lot, but it's not necessarily something that I've come across a lot in the UK, and especially in this sphere personally. But innovation it is greatest, really.
It really is. It's so beautiful. And when we stop and we observe and we humble ourselves and look at what nature has done, I mean, come on, planet Earth has had billions of years of research and development to perfect every system. And we're just here to enjoy it. And I think that's like the greatest gift ever. But now we've recognized the fact that our behaviors are causing it to decline. And we can't have that happen. We cannot. We have to stop it right here. This is our turning point. And it's the most exciting field to me of science because it's the most interdisciplinary. When we were shooting the show Nature Knows Best, and it's available on Amazon Prime, by the way, if anyone wants to watch it, and there's a bunch of clips on YouTube too. I got to interview scientists, engineers, chemists, inventors, every walk of life. It showcased how biomimicry can play a role. And I'll give you one example. There's a building in Seattle, Washington called the Bullitt Center. And that building was created solely as a proof of concept to show and prove to the world that we can build green buildings that are not taking away from our planet, but adding to it. That building, a 6-story Class A business building, was providing electricity for, a mile radius around them, because of all the solar panels they had on their roof. They had rainwater catchment systems where the whole building was using water from the rain. Underneath, they were using energy to heat the building from geothermal vents. And the building literally was on a system that could breathe. The system was, the windows would open. If the building was too hot, it would open and release the hot air. If it was too cold, it would keep it in. And I just encourage you to look up this place. It's called the Bullitt Center. And it was created, and the vision was built by the man who helped establish Earth Day back in the 1970s. And he's a tremendous person, and this has been his lifelong goal to show this. And so how do we move forward? We have to look at the examples that work and the systems that have been proven.
That's it. We have to look to nature, like you said, Danny. We have to look at what's worked in the past and what hasn't, and how we work with nature. And also a webinar earlier about changing the movement of money. I won't touch on it now because we touched on it a lot previously with Andrew Mitchell, and he's a massive advocate for this. And we must ask questions. We must ask where our pension funds are and what money the banks are invested, where they're using our money and what kind of programs and stuff they're investing in, and are we okay with that? So it's about having the confidence to ask these questions, even if you feel it's sometimes like you're not very aware or educated in that sector. That's why you ask the questions. That's why we learn. And I think often, rather than not, especially in my friendship circle over here, people feel a little bit like, oh, I don't really want to ask that question because I'm not educated in that. But it's absolutely what we need to be doing moving forward, is challenging the status quo and working towards a more sustainable future that we can all live in harmony with. So
I think that's a really important point as well, because I think tone is really important. And I think making, it's really important that people don't feel that they're like coming into it completely fresh and their naivety is a bad thing, because we all know that, like, you know, all innovation proves and shows that when you try and put yourself in the kind of position of a child, even, you are free of all these like oppressive systems that have just kind of been forced on you without you even realizing. And I think that quite often the ocean space can be quite sort of scary and sort of like it doesn't need to be like that at all. You know, there's a lovely quote around like sustainability doesn't need people doing it perfectly, it needs millions doing it imperfectly. And as a brand and as storytellers, that's really important for us, I think, is to make it feel like it's not too heavy-handed and too serious. And I think humor is a great tool as well. And also
stay playful.
stay playful and stay humble, and like, you know, make a joke out of it if you get it wrong. If you forget how many millions of plastic are flowing into our oceans each day, which I don't, by the way, but there are stats that I do.
I'm so bad with stats. I don't remember anything. But I did hear on a podcast earlier that I can't even remember it. I can't even remember what it was. But it was that the ocean has absorbed 90% of the greenhouse gases that we've emitted. And that there's someone who's writing in the comment, David R.T. Richardson. James Blakely.
Oh yeah.
And
yes,
such like an abstract concept to be thinking that this beautiful, incredible horizon that we love and enjoy and brings so much healing to us is just in this state of suffering and of just absorbing all of these evil toxic gases that we're just continuing to push out into the atmosphere. It's like the sea will just take and take and take the plastic too. It's like only can take so much. And there's been so many experiences in my life where I've seen whole beaches full of plastic and come across them and thought, you know, single-handedly you can't pick up all this plastic before the tide comes in. And over the next few days, the ocean just swallowed it all of it. And you're just left thinking of the ocean as a human being and like how much, you know, evil destruction can one kind of being take. That doesn't really lead me anywhere, but I think
it's a valid point.
I can't comprehend how angry the ocean must be. So angry with us.
The ocean continues to regurgitate its plastic, which is, again, the remnant of a much deeper root cause. And I think it speaks to this analogy of where we are right now. Again, we have to keep bringing this up. We cannot live in a bubble and think that, oh, this social situation right now is just going to blow over. No, we've reached a capacity and a tipping point that needs to be addressed. And so when you say, Joya, you're talking about the ocean, you know, it has reached its capacity and it's shouldered all this carbon for us for so long from the beginning of the industrial age. But at the same time, it's the same thing for people of color and those who've been disenfranchised and those who've been put to the side and disregarded and forced to absorb the brunt of our choices. People who are living next to those plastic refineries and fossil fuel refineries and having to sort through the trash in Indonesia, which you'll see in the video that's being launched today by Ocean Bottle. You will see the impacts of that. And enough is enough. Enough is enough. We have to stop it here and move and shift and turn the course.
Yeah.
Absolutely. Gosh, I got a bit emotional then. We've got some questions in the panel here. I've got, going back to your point, Iona, about sustainability being done not perfectly, but what was the quote? Lots of people doing it imperfectly. That's it. And a lot of people here asking about storytelling. You know, what advice could you give someone who wants to start filming for ocean conservation, and another about what's the most rewarding piece you've worked on and how do we get into it? And Danny, I saw you commented on one just saying just start creating content. Just doesn't matter what kind of camera you've got, or if you feel like you can or can't write, start writing, start taking pictures, start filming, start documenting how you see the world and the values that you can add, and let's all carry this conversation forward, because collaboration is key. And I think that's one thing that I want to say from an ocean culture point of view, the movement that we've seen even over the last few weeks during COVID, and the amount of people that have been jumping on calls with us and sharing their experiences and sharing their stories. I just think the opportunity is endless when it comes to being able to, do this and not have to do it face to face. I think that's important too. I don't know if anybody wants to add anything there about how they can, best tell a story about the ocean and not know anything about filming. Maybe Joya and Lucy, you can add something in there.
I think one point, just following on from a lot of things that you just said, Tamsin, is never underestimate your audience. And it's quite like a weird abstract conceptual thing to think about, but we're so intelligent human beings, and yeah, the audience is looking for new, refreshing, imaginative stories that we need to propel us forward. And storytelling can do that. It can create like the stories of tomorrow, and fill people with hope and put people on platforms and amplify voices. And the internet is this incredible space. I mean, it's democratic. We have well, in some ways it's not. There's all kind of like shadow banning and awful stuff that happens, but as we've seen during COVID and this the revolution, there's this space on Instagram, and it's just, we have this freedom of speech to communicate with each other, and it's super powerful, so powerful what's going on. So I just think, I hope everyone stays super actively engaged after this and continues to use these social media platforms to push change. Yeah, they're quite weird spaces, and they solve some purposes and not others. So it's always worth bearing that in mind.
And if you don't want to use social media, hold the brands and hold the companies that you buy from accountable. Send them an email. My mum's amazing at this. She'll just like dump like plastic in Morrison's. She emails companies saying to them, why have you just sent me this massive polystyrene box with F all in the bottom of it? Like, we really need to be holding companies and businesses accountable. And even better, like, get onto your local MP if you can, whether it's a social issue or an environmental issue. The more that we speak up, the more that they'll have to change and adapt.
Yeah, and it's a simple supply and demand, right? Like, you look at the consumers, we make all the decisions by what we buy. We tell the companies what we want, and we have to reclaim that power.
Yeah,
sorry, Lucy, go ahead.
There was an amazing woman on your event who said that the consumer has so much power, and I think we lose sight of that, and we think that we're just subjected to it, but we're not. And it's across the board, like food insecurity and sovereignty and all of these things, and we just need to bring it back and act on our decisions. And I think communicating locally has become even more prominent than ever with COVID. It's like, how can you impact the people around you instead of looking over there or like pointing a finger over there? What's on your right, your left, behind you? Like, who can you talk to? How can you communicate with these people around you? Because I think we often lose sight of the people immediately around us. They need to change, and we need to push them forward too, because we're all engaged in storytelling and activism and fighting for goodwill, but it is kind of a fight of numbers, isn't it, at this point?
The critical mass.
Yeah.
And also, not just the people around us need to change, but also coming back to, like, if people are looking to start storytelling. It's like sometimes the people around you have the most inspiring stories, and sometimes even if you live 8 hours from the ocean, you can find an ocean conservation story on your road. It's like, I guess it's just about being curious and being empathic and being imaginative, like we mentioned earlier, and not being afraid to say something or to argue for what's right.
What a beautiful moment.
Yeah, and I also wanted to say, and I'm sure everyone here agrees, that like if anyone wants to, like, I'm sure our contact details of someone, but if anyone that's been on this has questions or wants further advice than what we've discussed, like, please feel free to get in touch. Joya and I feel really strongly about wanting to inspire other people to tell their own stories and be there to mentor if it's needed, or anything. So
or you can mentor us.
I know, I was just about to say that. Like, please help us.
Yes, absolutely.
Well, Lucy, on your point, I love that about ocean culture stories. It's something that Matt and I have been trying to encourage, especially during COVID, is that, you know, we've not been able to travel and we've not been able to go to these places to tell these stories. And it's something I know I spoke to you girls about, and it's a long-term goal for us, is to be able to grow our community of ocean storytellers around the world so that we don't have to travel to these places. And the people that are documenting, you know, the ocean bank story in Sri Lanka are Sri Lankans, that are from, they know that's, you know, they know the country back to front, and they know how best to tell these stories. And I think if I can encourage any filmmaker, creative, photographer, is to use this time to look at your local community and to work with your local community and to, you know, fish out those ocean culture local stories, because there's so much to learn. And locally here in Jersey, over the last few weeks, I've learned so much. I've been inundated with information and how the community has worked together and relied less so on, I suppose, imports and depended on our local fishermen and our local farms. And it's been so lovely to witness, and something that we're all kind of lobbying for moving forward, on how best to make this you know, part of our future. So we've, you know, people have developed apps to allow people to find their local veggie bank and their local fishermen on their local beaches to find out who's open. We've got Facebook groups going. And I just think if the last few weeks has taught us anything, it's about the power of local, about stepping up and stepping in. And I just think it's a beautiful thing to have witnessed here locally, but also globally we've seen it. And I think it's
it's local resilience, and it's what all communities all over the world, we're going to face these issues as the climate crisis comes to like a peak, you know, food sovereignty and where we get our food from and who's around us and the vulnerable communities that we need to support. I've started a community garden here, and climate change is not in some ways like on our doorstep, but it is also in like hidden ways, and there's just so much that can be done. And I think when you can think of things as small networks that just need like love and support locally, it's really empowering, because it makes you feel like you're operating outside of this like this kind of capitalist system. You're just sharing like love and support and vegetables, and it means, I think it's very empowering. It's like a step on the way to kind of realizing that we don't need to rely on these huge systems that are essentially oppressive to our free will.
Yeah, and that goes back to conversation as well, the amount of people that feel like their voices are being heard, even if it's just in a Facebook group, that then goes on to becoming something bigger. And I think that's going back to cross-cultural representation in the ocean sphere. Step up, step in, initiate that conversation, participate in webinars, participate in groups, and have your say. Because, you know, I know this is on a smaller scale here in Jersey, but we've seen now the pressure on the government to do something about supporting our local fishermen. That's all because of a Facebook group and somebody that had an idea of putting something together to help our fishermen during this time. And I know it's a little bit abstract, but it's a good point, and I think it's something that we can all do moving forward.
Yes, we can. We have to take back our power and understand that we are able to maintain our own communities. And I want to encourage everyone, before things shift again to the next phase, before COVID is over, just to do a personal inventory of yourself. Like, what are your behaviors? What can you change? What don't you need? Because that has been revealed to me too. It's like there are so many things and elements in my life where I was like, I did not need this. Why am I doing this? And having that epiphany and understanding, it's great because now your life is simplified.
Yeah.
And like you can see even yesterday, the Minneapolis City Council here in the States, where the George Floyd situation happened, has voted to defund and dismantle the city's police department because they were bringing violence to the community when the community is perfectly capable of handling their own. So that is the type of example that I think we need to set for ourselves in understanding all of the systems that have been oppressive, specifically to people of color. Like, they don't need to be here anymore. We need to take the authorship back to handle each other and to take care of one another.
Oh, absolutely. Thank you all so much for this. It's been, I just wish we could carry on. Danny, have you got any other virtual events that people listening could maybe join into today?
Sure. I have one other virtual event later today at 2 p.m. Pacific. So I'm in Los Angeles currently. So 2 p.m. Pacific, 5 p.m. Eastern. I don't know what time that is in the UK, but help me out.
Yeah.
Late.
Okay. Yeah, it's late. If you want to stay up late, but it's a film screening with Five Gyres, which is a phenomenal organization here in LA, working to end plastic pollution. And so we'll have the screening start at 2, and there will be a panel afterward that I'll be moderating. So please feel free to join us. You can find the information on Instagram or on Facebook. It's the digit 5 and Gyres, Gyres.
I'll definitely be tuning in for that. And then Iona, please tell me when I can watch this film. I'm gagging to watch it.
Yeah, shameless plug of Ocean Bottle's first kind of brand film. It's under 2 minutes long. We'll be sharing it on our social very soon. And thanks to these guys for taking part. We've also just come out with a poster campaign in London as well. We managed to get some really reasonable advertising space. And we wanted to create some posters to kind of remind people of like the wonder of the oceans and bring them to the oceans, but also remind them of the war on plastic and not to forget. So check out our Instagram for that. That's just Ocean Bottle. And yeah, keep us on your radar.
Brilliant. Oh, girls, thank you so much. And let's carry on this conversation. Matt, I've just realised, do you have anything to say? Sorry.
No, I've purposely stayed out of this. I just have to say thank you for such a positive hour of conversation. That was so nice listening to you all. It was really inspiring, and I've got to say, I feel grateful for all the chats today, and especially finishing with this. I think it was just so. It was so informative, it was so positive, and it explained everything that we've been thinking ourselves. So knowing that there's many other people out there and we're all thinking the same is we're all on the right route with this. We're all, we're creating content, we're telling stories, we're connecting with the right people, we're connecting with great voices and great businesses around the world. So thank you. It was a pleasure to listen to that.